Welcome back to this NPTEL course on Introduction to Exercise Physiology and Sports Performance. Wearable technology is one of the top fitness trend across the globe as per the American College of Sports Medicine survey conducted for the year 2023. All of us use this smartwatches where you can have your heart rate recorded, right? So how do you use this heart rate to the best of its benefit in terms of exercise training and improving your performance? So that's what we are going to deal with in this particular session. So you might be having the question, what should be the right heart rate training zone for my age or for the activity that I do? So here I'm going to clear your queries with respect to heart rate. Welcome to this session on cardiovascular system and exercise. So this particular module will be divided into three parts. So I am Dr. Chandrasekhar Guru. I'm an assistant professor in sports medicine with the Armed Forces Medical Services. What you will learn from this session, you'll know the basics of the cardiovascular system, various parameters, the determining factors, how these factors respond in terms of exercise, and how do we use to the best of the practice in terms of exercise training of these parameters. So the human body is a closed system, so it has a closed circulatory system, and the components of this closed circulatory system are the heart, which is the pump, and you have the blood vessel, which is the pipe through which the blood is circulated. The components of the circulatory system are heart, blood vessel and blood. So in this part 1, we will see in detail about these three components. Why do you need a circulatory system? You have assumed it right. Circulatory system is basically to supply the food and oxygen to the cell and carry back the waste products as well as the carbon dioxide from the tissues to the respective organs, clear them off from the tissues. It also helps to maintain a body temperature and also helps in fighting the disease. So let's move on to the individual components. We focus on the heart. The picture there shows you the location of the heart within the skeletal framework. It is in the center of the chest, and it is an hollow structure which is just size of your fist towards your left, and it is composed of specialized muscle or tissue called as cardiac muscle, and it is enclosed in a sac called pericardium. So if you see, the heart per se is divided into three layers: the outer pericardium, the middle myocardium and the inner endocardium. So you go from inside out: endocardium, myocardium and pericardium. The myocardium is the specialized cardiac muscle which acts as the pump and it can contract. As I mentioned, the heart is an hollow chamber. So the heart is an hollow structure which is divided into various chambers. The chambers on top are called the atrium. The chambers on the bottom are called as the ventricles. These chambers are divided by means of septum, and the oxygenated blood, or in a layman term it's the pure blood, and the deoxygenated blood or the impure blood, they don't mix up normally because of the presence of this septum. So let's see a cut section of an heart. So you have cut open the heart to see the chambers of the heart. So let me explain here in the slide. So this is the right side and this is the left side. So if you notice the heart, on the right hand side you have the right atrium on top and the right ventricle at the bottom, and on the left hand side if you see, you have the left atrium and the left ventricle. So the right and left are divided by this septum, what you have here. So thus the chambers of the heart, they don't mix up blood, and the right and the left, they don't mix up blood, to be specific, and they're divided by the septum. The importance of the septum is that if the septum is defective, it may end up in mixing up of blood. That's an important thing that you need to remember. Coming on to the endocardium. The endocardium, the innermost layer of the heart, has multiple valves which only allow unidirectional blood flow. That is, the blood can flow in only one single direction. So that between the right and the left, if you see, the right atrium is here. The blood from the right atrium enters into the right ventricle by means of what you called as the tricuspid valve. Why is the name? Because it has three cusps. That is the name, tricuspid. We come to the left hand side. You have the left atrium and the left ventricle. The blood from the left atrium enters the left ventricle by means of mitral valve. Okay. The blood from the right ventricle is pushed into the pulmonary artery through this valve called as pulmonary valve. Similarly, the blood from the left ventricle is pushed into the aorta. This is the aorta, and this is the valve which is called as the aortic valve. So these are the different valves which control the movement of the blood. What is the importance? The timely closing and opening of the valves produces sounds, commonly called as lup-tup. So that is the heart sounds, S1 and S2, heart sound 1 and heart sound 2. In certain cases, there may be continuous occurrence of additional sounds. So these are called as murmurs because of some defects in the valves. So the entire gamut is termed as valvular heart disease. Moving further, how does the blood flow? Let's focus on the deoxygenated blood. So if you see here, from the various parts of the body, the blood enters through two major veins. They are the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. The blood from the lower body, that is the legs and the trunk, enters through the inferior vena cava, and the blood from the head and neck and the upper limb enters through the superior vena cava and empties in the right atrium. So this deoxygenated blood further passes, if you follow the arrow mark, it passes through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, further when the heart contracts, if you notice the animation, when the heart contracts, it pushes the blood as the, see the pulmonary valve opening, through that it enters into the pulmonary artery, and from the pulmonary artery it is sent to the lungs. So the deoxygenated blood, which is high in carbon dioxide and low in oxygen, is kind of pushed through the pulmonary artery into the lungs. Lungs is the place where the respiration happens, wherein you inhale oxygen, and this oxygen which you inhale gets pushed into the deoxygenated blood, and carbon dioxide is released out. So this is how the process of movement happens with respect to the deoxygenated blood. Let's proceed with the left side. What happens with the oxygenated blood? So the deoxygenated blood reaches the lungs. In the lungs, the diffusion of these gases happens, and finally the oxygen enters the blood, and this oxygenated blood enters from the lungs to the left side, left atrium, by pulmonary veins. So the pulmonary veins carry the oxygenated blood, and drains into the left atrium, and from the left atrium through the mitral valve the blood enters the left ventricle. When the heart contracts and you see the aortic valve opening, the blood which is filled in the left ventricle is pumped into the aorta. I'm so sorry. So this goes through the aorta. The aorta is the red one which is depicted here. So this is pumped out with certain amount of pressure so that the blood that is being pumped from the left ventricle reaches even till the tips of your extremities. So there has to be some amount of pressure for the flow of the blood to the terminal most part of the body or the tissue. So that happens from the left ventricle of the heart. Moving further, the heart has specialized tissue which I had mentioned before, that is your conductive system formed within the cardiac muscle. Say here, if you see in this animation, you will find that specified structures which are earmarked in yellow. So these are nothing but named as sinoatrial node, which is present somewhere in the right atrium, and it itself generates the impulse activity of the heart. So the specialized tissue results in an electrical effect which gets converted to form a mechanical contraction. So it is generated at a rate of 100 beats per minute at the level of sinoatrial node. Further from there, the same is conducted through the atrioventricular node or the AV node. If you see here, it is located at the junction of atrium and the ventricle of the right side. So it's called as the AV node, and from there it is further transmitted through the Purkinje fibers, which again gets distributed throughout the muscle of the heart. So thus, through the system of SA node, AV node and Purkinje fibers, the electrical impulse are transmitted, which gets converted into a mechanical contraction, the relaxation and the contraction of the heart. So this particular electrical activity which is produced by the heart is what you record in your what you call as ECG or the electrocardiography. And in case of any abnormality in terms of the electrical conductivity, you will end up in something called as arrhythmia, wherein you will have different findings, abnormal findings, pathological findings in the. So moving further, let's focus on the second component, that is the blood vessel. So the blood vessel is divided into three parts. It's a network of pipeline, you can say, wherein the blood is distributed across the body as the heart pumps the blood. So the heart left ventricle pumps the blood into the largest artery of the body, that is the aorta, and from the aorta, the artery, it is further divided into multiple small branches across the tissue. It's just a schematic diagram which is shown here, and this particular arteries are further divided into smaller network of arteries called as arterioles. And further inside the tissue, you see the cells here. So inside the tissues, further branching happens and forms a single walled, single cell layered wall of blood vessel called as capillaries. So through the capillaries, the diffusion happens in the tissue, and thereafter it continues to form the venules and the vein. So from the left heart, you have the oxygenated blood entering through arterioles into the tissues through capillaries, and thereafter from the tissues, the waste products are carried through the capillaries, venules, and then the vein, then followed by the superior and the inferior vena cava into the right side of the heart. Let's know something in detail about each of these. Arteries are large blood vessels, as I had mentioned, and they have about 13% of the blood at any point of time during rest. and they carry the oxygenated blood from the heart to various parts of the body. Since, as I had mentioned before, they act against a certain amount of pressure at which the left ventricle or the heart pumps out the blood, their walls are slightly thicker so that they can offer that resistance to the pressure that is generated by the heart. So the walls are slightly thicker. And can you guess an artery which is a misnomer where it carries a deoxygenated blood? If you have given keen attention, you could have guessed the answer by now. Yes, that's the pulmonary artery. So we saw that the deoxygenated blood which enters the right side of the heart, the right ventricle, and then it is pumped into the pulmonary artery towards the lungs. So pulmonary artery is a misnomer. It's the pulmonary artery, the name, but then it carries a deoxygenated blood. Let's focus on the capillaries. Capillaries are smallest blood vessels which are layered by single cell. It's mainly because of the easy exchange that is permeable through the cell in the tissue level. So it helps in exchange of various nutrients, the gases, across the cell wall, and it is at the level of the tissues. And there are remaining amount of blood which is located in the heart and lungs as well. So you have 7% of the heart in the 7% of the blood in the heart and 9% of the blood in the lungs. During the last component of the blood vessel is the vein, and it is one of the important component. Why? Because the maximum amount of blood resides in the veins of the system, almost 64%, and they carry the blood from various parts of the body to the heart, and the deoxygenated blood that is carried. These veins have walls which are not so much thick as compared to the arteries, because the pressure comes down as it goes towards the vein. In order to avoid that backflow because of the lower pressure, you also have certain additional uh, you know additional valves within the veins, so that once the contraction happens and the blood flows, then the valve closes and prevents the backflow. This is especially important since we are erect, and our movement of the deoxygenated blood towards the heart happens from the extremities towards the heart. Heart is at a higher location, so it has to go against gravity. So in order to avoid the backflow because of the gravity, you have more valves located in the lower limb veins. Further, you also have these veins co-located along the muscles. As and when the muscle contract, that also helps in pumping of this blood towards the heart. So that's why you would have heard about peripheral pump. Peripheral pump is nothing but your calf muscle of the legs, which is also called as peripheral pump. The central pump is nothing but your heart, and the peripheral pump, that is a muscle. Since the veins are co-located along the muscles or through the muscles, the contraction of this results in pumping of this blood towards the heart, right side of the heart. So that's why the calf muscles are called as the peripheral pump. And do you know what happens when the valves which are located in the veins fail? It ends up in a clinical condition. I'll give you a clue, you can guess it. I've shown a traffic signal also there. Because of prolonged activity, it can happen. Yeah. If you have guessed it right, yes, it is more common in traffic policemen because of their long, duration standing hours, and the condition is called as varicose veins, common in the lower limbs. So we are covering the last component of the circulatory system, that is the blood. The blood has two parts, is the plasma and the blood cells. The plasma forms the liquid component, with 90% of it is being water and 10% of it is the remaining nutrients and dissolved gases. And the blood cells are the red blood cell, white blood cell, and the platelets. The blood is red in color because of the red blood cell. And then you have the main function of the blood is to transfer or transport oxygen and carbon dioxide, and mainly happens with the help of hemoglobin, which is present in the red blood cells. And it also functions to maintain the acid base balance. Do you know what do you mean by viscosity? You would have heard about it. Viscosity is a physics term wherein it determines the thickness of the fluid. So the more viscous the fluid is, the resistance is going to be more. That is, more thicker the fluid is, the resistance to flow is going to be more. To compare yourself, example of water flowing and an oil spilled down on the floor flowing. So oil is thicker, so obviously the flow will be slower because of the increased viscosity. So why it is important? Because more thicker the blood, as such the blood is 2 times thicker than water. Then if it is more thicker because of the increased cellular components, it can compromise the blood flow. This is important to know because it has various connotation in the application in exercise training. So to summarize the part 1 of this session, we discussed about various components of cardiovascular system, the function and the chambers and the valves and the blood flow which happens in the heart, the different types of blood vessels and the components of blood and their function. So if you want to have additional in-depth knowledge about this, you can also refer to this standard textbooks. Thank you.